Well, it is time for the final divisions to go over, and we're beginning with the AFC North, the last one for the AFC. Let's waste no more time and dive right into this. Starting with the division winning Pittsburgh Steelers, the Steelers lost a lot of depth from their playoff roster that they had last season, and while that roster in the playoffs wasn't necessarily the greatest that they've had, they did focus on keeping key pieces from it. Of the losses they had, the biggest to the offense was Kenneth Gainwell being let to walk. He was a great piece of the running back room last season. His production is going to be missed, but they did at least attempt to replace it. They lose 4 depth wide receivers and 3 depth tight ends as well. The defense's losses are filled with depth pieces, with the biggest of the bunch being Kyle Duggar. He was a rental piece that they traded for at the deadline this past season. He did start every game for the Steelers and get 2 interceptions, one of them being a pick 6. But at the end of the day, still kind of a depth rental piece that should, in theory, they should be able to bring someone in and have that same level of production. For their additions, we begin with Rico Dowdle being the big running back addition. He's coming off of a career season with Carolina in his 1 year there, and you should be able to replace that production that Gainwell had with them last season. They brought in more depth at tight end with Robert Tonyan being brought in. He hasn't been as productive since he left Green Bay, but he's still a solid tight end option for the team that already has 2 really good tight ends on the roster. To try and replace Kyle Duggar, they brought in Jaquan Brisker. He's been a solid safety option for Chicago over the past 4 seasons, and now is going to be slotted into what should really be a good secondary, as well as them adding Jamil Dean. Dean has been a really good corner option for Tampa the past 7 seasons. He is going to be lined up outside in order to allow Jalen Ramsey to roam in the secondary a bit more, and this Steelers defense is the Steelers defense. We know what to expect out of it. This has been confirmed to be the last season of Aaron Rodgers as he returns for 1 more season, and there's some pressure on the Steelers this season to ride off into the sunset. Him reuniting with Mike McCarthy means that it's not an entirely new system that the offense is going to be running. A lot of the language is going to be the exact same from what they're used to last season, so I don't expect the offense to really miss that much of a beat. The defense also looks nearly identical from last season, and it was a middle-of-the-road defense last year, ranking at just 17th in the league. On paper, like 5 years ago, this Steelers roster would be a contending roster. But now with the age of a lot of the key pieces and just the nature of this team over the past few seasons, I do have some questions about if they can put it all together and how far they can go if they do put it together in regular season. It's a largely similar roster from what won the division last season, so really only time will tell how these older bones are going to work for the Steelers. The Baltimore Ravens are next, and I can point to 3 main losses for the Ravens in the offseason from their list of departures, at least for me. The first one being Isaiah Likely. It's a tough blow to the tight end room. It seems like they were setting him up to be the tight end one of the future, and now though the tight end room is going to be pretty weak and missing some pretty good production. Tyler Linderbaum is a tough blow. Anytime you lose a top of the line center, there's going to be a period to readjust, and it's going to cause some issues at first. But those are also the same issues that should be able to be worked out through over the course of training camp before the season actually starts. Draymond Jones is the kind of one main loss for the defense. He was a rental piece for them last season, got in at the deadline, but it's still going to be a production that you would probably like to have back to some degree just to be certain of it, and instead you're going to need someone to kind of have that production over the course of a full season now. They did bolster the defensive line through free agency by bringing back Calais Campbell after he spent the past few seasons with Miami and Arizona, and they brought in Trey Hendrickson. Both should massively help that front 7 and pair great with Roquan Smith and Nnamdi Madubuike. The draft sees them bring in more depth at wide receiver by the selections of Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt. While I don't think any of their top 5 wide receivers do truly stand out, it is still a solid looking wide receiver room on paper that should be able to give Lamar Jackson some guys to throw to. It's a room that feels similar to the Packers wide receiver room from this past season, and it definitely can work for the Ravens. New head coach Jesse Minter comes from a defensive background, which I feel fits the Ravens really well considering how their Super Bowl teams were built. They have a roster that feels should be able to break through at some point pretty soon, but last season missed the mark by them not even making the playoffs, and this season has a weird feeling surrounding it because of that. I can't quite put my finger on what exactly feels wrong with this team, but something does feel amiss. It could just be the new head coach for the Ravens for the first time in a long time. It could be some of the other very minor shakeups that they've had. But all around, this is a Ravens team that definitely has some very minor concerns, but they still have Lamar Jackson, they still have Derrick Henry. I still feel pretty good about them entering the season. The Cincinnati Bengals didn't lose a lot this offseason, but the substance of those losses is big. Noah Fant was productive during his 1 year in Cincy, having 3 touchdowns on 34 catches and a career-high catch percentage with just about 83%. Cam Taylor-Britt and Geno Stone are 2 tough losses in the secondary, and yes, the secondary has been a weak point for the Bengals over the past few seasons. It is still tough to lose 2 consistent pieces, even with the injuries plaguing Cam Taylor-Britt of last season. It's still 2 consistent pieces that you would probably like to have back as you're still trying to work out some of those issues. Obviously, the biggest loss was Trey Hendrickson, but at the same time, this has been an inevitability for the Bengals over the past few seasons, so they've had time to prepare, and they did spend 2025 and this past offseason getting things ready for this departure. Boye Mafe, Dexter Lawrence, and Jonathan Allen are adds to the front 7 this year, and each are really nice additions to a defense that is looking to greatly improve from last season. They also bring in Kyle Duggar and Brian Cook to provide some help in the secondary. It was a very defensive-heavy offseason for the Bengals this year, which makes a lot of sense. This followed into the draft as well, with the first pick being Cassius Howell out of Texas A&M. He's an edge rusher, should be able to provide something there on that front 7. And on the flip side of all of this, they didn't really add anything to the offense and are really banking on their big 3. The Bengals are one of the more volatile teams I feel this season. If they get off to a hot start and their guys stay healthy, they could be an 11-win team. We're talking really highly about them. But if injuries plague them, they get off to a slow start, they could be seen as another disappointment of a season. There's a lot that is at stake with the Bengals this year, and there's a lot of ifs surrounding this team. The offense has the talent to be a solid unit once again this season. The defense should be better than the 38th ranked defense in the league last year, but another injury-filled season, and all of this just won't matter. And lastly, the Cleveland Browns, another team with a good amount of pieces leaving, but the substance of those pieces and those losses, at least offensively, wasn't really anything that they didn't go out there and actively try to replace. David Njoku has been one of their top playmakers offensively over the past few seasons. He departs as they do feel pretty confident in Harold Fanning continuing how he played last season, as he was a surprise of a tight end last year for the Browns. They lost 6 offensive linemen this past offseason with 3 tackles, 2 guards in the center, but this was an offensive line room that they did desperately need to overhaul, and they are working towards just that. Shelby Harris is one of 2 tough losses to the defensive line, but if Mason Graham can take that second-year leap that they hope that they can get out of him, he can be a real threat on the defensive line. The big thing was trading away Myles Garrett, and replacing someone that had 23 sacks last season is an impossible task, but they're going to be trying their best in doing so by getting Jared Verse in return for the trade. Verse is a really talented young player that could easily take another step in his game, being on a team now that doesn't have a lot of expectations going into the season. This can allow him to experiment with his game and with get-offs to be able to add more moves to his repertoire and potentially take that next step that the Browns are going to want from him. Elton Jenkins, Zion Johnson, and Titus Howard are veteran offensive linemen that were brought in to help overhaul a pretty bad offensive line from last season. Plus, they did use their first-round pick on Spencer Fondo in the draft, so they should have a pretty decent offensive line for whoever is going to be the quarterback this season. The draft was a pretty offensive-focused one as well, with the next 2 picks being KC Concepcion of Texas A&M and Denzel Boston of Washington. Both are going to be really solid wide receivers in that room and really help out round out to what could be a serviceable 5 wide receivers if you tack on Jerry Jeudy, Isaiah Bond, and Cedric Tillman on top of it. I jumped to the draft pretty quickly there, but to quickly add one more offseason acquisition that they brought in Quincy Williams. Coming off a season high for sacks with 3.5, it's another add to the front 7, which should make this room solid even with the departure of Myles Garrett. Obviously, the Browns are going to be one of those teams that nobody really expects to do anything special this season, as they do still feel like they're quite a ways away from really having something there as a team, but you can still see kind of the semblance of a foundation, at least with the acquisitions that they had. I could see them pulling off some upsets here and there and being kind of a true middle-of-the-road team this season, and then with the chance to build off of that. QB play is going to be the biggest question, obviously, for this team. The offense is only going to be able to go as far as whoever is at quarterback for them, whether that's Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson. I personally think it should be Shedeur. He looked okay in his time last season as the starter. It wasn't anything special, but it's something you could at least bank on a bit more than Deshaun Watson, who was missed pretty much the last season and a half due to an ACL and Achilles injury. At least with Shedeur, it's a young guy to be able to get some more reps and be able to figure out exactly what you have in him with a full season now worth of work. We shall see with the Browns, though, as the Browns have always been a questioning team with their decision making, and this is going to be another case of that. So now for my divisional outlook, and I'm going to have the Ravens winning the AFC North this season. even with this kind of mystery and mist surrounding the Ravens, I can't quite put my finger on what it is exactly. The offense looks pretty similar to have some pretty good additions to that side. Yes, Tyler Linderbaum and Isaiah Likely are gone. The tight end position is weak for the Ravens this season. I don't think that will matter all too much. The defense is still this Ravens defense. They just brought in a defensive-minded head coach, and Jesse Minter, I feel like, is going to be a pretty solid head coach for them. All around, the Ravens, even with this kind of question and mystery I have with them, it isn't anything I can really point out to definitively say why the Ravens should not win the division this season. As we get closer and as the preseason happens, maybe then I can find it. But as for now, I'm going to have them win the division. Second place, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers, and kind of a similar thing with the Ravens. They added to the team this season, some of their losses that they've had. They were able to bring in other guys to kind of fill in those gaps. The Steelers are a team that, unless injuries plague them this season, I don't see a world where they're too much worse from what they were last season, and they were a 10-win team that won the AFC North last year. I think it's going to be the Ravens and Steelers once again fighting for the top of this division, and with that, the Steelers are going to finish second. And with that, I have the Cleveland Browns finishing third. The main thing is the overhauled offensive line. That alone is probably going to win them an extra game or two here and there, since the quarterback is actually going to have time in the pocket. Now, depending on which quarterback they go with, either Watson or Sanders, it's probably going to change exactly how many wins I think this team has. I'm going to go in with the mindset that Shedeur Sanders is probably going to win that starting job, and at the very least should win that starting job. I think he's the better choice, even just for the long-term outlook of the team. Because if you know what you have in Shedeur entering next offseason, you can plan for the future a bit better. So at least for the time being, I'm thinking Shedeur is a starter, and I'm thinking he's going to get this Browns team to roughly that 7 or 8 win mark, maybe roughly around there. I feel like that should be enough for third in this division, and enough to be able to kind of have an idea for the future of the Cleveland Browns. So with that, I have the Cincinnati Bengals finishing last. There's just too many combinations of outcomes for the Bengals this season in terms of what needs to go right for them. They need to get off to a hot start. They need their guys to stay healthy offensively. They need the defense to step up a bit and play a bit better. They need all these different things, and when you try and put them together in a cohesive combination, there's too many possible combinations. The Bengals last season finally got off to a hot start, seemingly for the first time with Burrow as quarterback, and then Burrow gets hurt. The defense performs poorly. They're one of the worst. They're a 6-win team last season. They got off to a slow start in years prior. The defense plays pretty okay. The offense is healthy. They're a fantastic team. And then in years past, they're just a slow start. Injuries happen. The defense isn't great. There's too many things that could happen for the Bengals where I just can't really feel confident putting all my eggs in a single basket for this team. So with me kind of spreading it out for it, it's going to leave them to come in last place. So there are my thoughts on the AFC North. We wrap up all these offseason recaps next time with the NFC North. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Check out Saturday's video. I don't do this too often, but check out Saturday's long form video. I put a lot of work into that, and I'm pretty proud of it. It's a pretty fun one-off video, potentially, of going through an old NFL TV show. So go check that out. I'll see you all next time. Have yourselves a damn good one.